Yo no voy a leer nada finalmente, súbito, ¿viste?
Bueno.
Ahorita con surfing.
Sí, ahí we are flanked. I'm flanked. Estos micrófonos están listos.
Se oye bien, ¿sí?
Yo no te he tocado nada.
Ni yo, ni yo. Nadie. He tocado nada.
Protestando.
Es que el ceropo es muy divertido. ¿Tuviste la pata de ese?
¿La qué?
¿Viste la pata que es divertida?
Ah, está muy divertido, ¿verdad? Yo veía todo muy así, muy modernista, pero que no.
No. Gracias.
Sí, fíjate, está llegando más gente.
Sí, sí.
Funciona.
Este es el color del chakra de la comunicación. Y ese es el de la pasión. Y ese es el del corazón. Verde. Ujú. Y entonces tú me vas a estar preguntando a mí. O sea, tú vas a dirigir preguntas a mí.
O sea,
¿Cierto?
son dos statements y yo hago la primera pregunta de cada statement. Después tú y después digo. primera fila.
¿Ah? No.
Ok, ok. Ya estamos transmitiendo.
Ok.
All right. Oops.
¿Qué fue eso?
No sé. Ok.
¿Qué se cayó?
No sé.
It's not good.
Okay. I think we're starting. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Serpica Angelini, for those who don't know me, the founding director of the Transart Foundation for Art and Anthropology, established in 1997 to support the interdisciplinary research and work of artists and scholars who explore relevant issues involving the fields of art and contemporary anthropology. Foundation is now celebrating 5 years operating in these beautiful premises designed by our one and only architect, Troy Chow. It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce Dr. Fabiola Lopez Duran, who will conduct our discussion on Carolina Otero's work in her current exhibition, Linframans. Originally trained as an architect in Venezuela at the Universidad de los Andes in Mérida, Fabiola Lopez Duran earned her PhD in the history, theory, and criticism of architecture and art from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Prior to joining Rice University as an associate professor of art history and co-director of their program in museum and cultural heritage, she was the 2009-2011 Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in the Humanities at the Department of History of Art at the University of California, Berkeley. Fabiola Lopez Duran's interdisciplinary research and teaching focuses on the history and theory of modern and contemporary European and Latin American art and architecture, with an emphasis on Latin America. Her book, Eugenics in the Garden: Architecture, Medicine, and Landscape from France to Latin America in the Early 20th Century, investigates a particular strain of eugenics that moved from the realms of medicine and law to design, architecture, and urban planning, becoming a critical instrument in the crafting of modernity. Her book, Eugenics in the Garden, was recognized in 2018 by the Society of Architectural Historians with a S.A.H. Mellon Author Award, and in 2019 by the Daedalus Foundation's Robert Motherwell Book Prize, Outstanding Book on Modernism in the Arts. As part of the faculty at Rice University, Fabiola Lopez Duran has been distinguished with several prestigious teaching awards from 2015 through 2018. And in addition, she's also honored to serve as a magister of the Hanson College. And notably, in 2020, Fabiola was asked to lead a project very dear to her heart, the Racial Geography Project at Rice University's Task Force on Slavery, Segregation, and Racial Injustice, supported by the Race and Anti-Racism Research Fund. In addition, this year she was published as an editor of Architecture in Development, Systems, and Emergence of the Global South. Fabiola's academic essays and articles have been published in Europe, Asia, South America, and the United States. Please welcome Dr. Fabiola Lopez Duran. And now I have the honor and pleasure to introduce also our distinguished exhibiting artist, Carolina Otero. Carolina was born in Paris, France. She's a Venezuelan visual artist based in Houston, Texas since 2013, a graduate of the Cooper Union for the Advancements of Science and Art in New York City. Carolina works in a variety of media: painting, drawing, collage, printmaking, photography, and more recently, plaster and ceramics. In addition to her lifelong practice as a visual artist, Carolina dedicated many years to creating educational programs geared towards teaching art to children in Venezuela. Her interest in learning creative processes has led her to further her independent studies in education and human development. In addition to her present exhibition at the Transart Foundation, Otero has had a number of solo exhibitions since 1991 at the Sala Mendoza, the Galleria Pio, Galleria Felix, among other venues in Caracas, in other cities in Venezuela, as well as in Paris, Oslo, and after moving in Houston at the Galleria Regina. In 2017, she exhibited her work in Pinta Miami's Crossing Cultures solo projects. And since 1985, she has participated in many group exhibitions while living in Venezuela, such as the National Gallery of Art, the Mario Abreu Contemporary Art Museum. And after moving to Houston, her work was exhibiting in many venues, such as Nina Torres in Miami, the Houston Art League, Jung Center, Art Box Gallery, the Union Gallery, Sicardi Ayers Bacino Gallery, the Amarillo Museum of Art, the Lawndale Art Center, and the Holocaust Museum in Houston. So this was an introduction I wrote for this exhibition, and I think you may have read it, but I will repeat it. And after years of introspection and decantation added to the profound silence enveloping the pandemic, Carolina Otero has created one of the most moving tributes to the liminal process involved in listening to her own inner voice, unfolding her infinitely subtle language as a visual artist. An equally subtle musical electronic composition by her sister, Mercedes Otero from 1983, titled Danza de una flor para el desierto, or Dance of a Flower for the Desert, which accompanied the exhibition, will be heard in its entirety to close our event this evening. So without further ado, let's start the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So let me start with a very simple but powerful observation, one that Surpik entertains in her last test on Carolina's work that is in this brochure that you can find just at the entrance of the exhibition, one that elucidates Carolina's own investigations and methodologies. I refer to Surpik's observation on Carolina's profound engagement with the origins of things, with the sparks of art and nature, of life itself, the radix of all. In other words, with her love for beginnings. So, in the history of architecture, architectural surveys often begin with the publication of Marc-Antoine Logier's essay on architecture. In this famous work, published in the mid 18th century, Logier argues that the so called primitive hut, the first architectural construction in the history of humankind, assumes a paradigmatic status, the originary model for all subsequent architectures as manifested by the superior works of Ancient Greece. Illustrated by Charles Eisen for the frontispiece of Logier's book. The primitive hut was built out of three branches by a single man attempting to shelter himself from the weather. In the image, a figure reclines on the ruins of a yet not invented architecture. In her left hand, she holds the instruments of an architect and points towards the work. Four columns, an entablature, and a pediment form a structure of wood that will be petrified and perfected in the Greek temples. Exemplified for Loger, who never visited a real Greek temple, in the Maison Carrée in Nîmes, in France. In contradistinction to earlier art historical invocations of primitive huts, Logier's one can be read as a guideline for modern modes of translation. So I just want you to follow me with these two things. Origins and Translation. As an architectural historian, Ginger Nolan, she's a very young and very bright architectural historian, argues the say's canonical status as the seminal test of modern architectural theory likely derive not so much from its literal contention that ancient Greek architecture demonstrated a perfect reinstantiation of a more primitive natural architecture. Rather, by allegorizing the primitive hut as a reification of savage or natural intellectual processes, Logé provides an exposition of how to think about thoughts in its originary condition upon its first encounter with its environment, at which point it transposes itself into architecture. Simply put, Logé's essay demonstrated how to translate primal thought into a construction that mediated between nature and human technology. It is not by chance that Logé's origin myth of the primitive hut has been argued over and over again, as has been argued over and over again, must have been influenced by an 18th century preoccupation with discovering the origins of language. And here we see in Carolina's drawing collages the beginnings of other beginnings, attempting a new language, a language that speaks to the modernism that surrounds her life. For some of you who maybe don't know Carolina's personal history, she is the daughter of two of the most important artists from modern times, Alejandro Otero and Mercedes Pardo. So there is this kind of speaking to rather than speaking about or interrogating, right? Modernism that surrounds her life without questioning it. What we see around here, around us today, seems to be a clear detachment from modernism. In other words, it seems that Carolina's work is closer to one of the two most important typologies, for the lack of a better term, that inform the production of architecture, which is the one developed out of the rationalist philosophy of the Enlightenment, initially formulated by Logé, found on a belief in the rational order of nature. In a clear detachment from the second one, which grew out of the need to confront the question of mass production at the end of the 19th century. So there is no tabula rasa, no functionality for Carolina's work. There is no interest in any of this. There are only marks, hints, gestures, gravity, thresholds, and translation. And within a new beginning that emerge in the inescapable creative act that resides at the center of translation. So in any translation work, there is a lot of creativity, even when we try not to have it, right? So let me start with this question. Will it be possible for you, Carolina, to elaborate on this connection between origins and translation that separates your work from modernism? So how your work is close to the paradigm of the primitive hut in Logé's essay. In other words, one could say that if art in general imitated nature, then architecture, as seen in Logé and as I actually see in your work, might be demonstrated to imitate in its turn not the outer appearance, but the inner procedures of nature. So,
okay. Wow. Oh my God. So precisely, you want me to talk about translation? What
And
can you
origins.
repeat the question?
Okay.
Without...
So I'm interested in this very particular connection that I see in all your work.
Yes.
I mean, because I think I'm completely inspired by that idea that is that Surpik um,
Pointed out.
but not only that, but that Surpik basically tied from one place to another in her test on your work for this exhibition in particular. But after looking to your work from the very beginning of your time in the
Yes.
1980s, it is very clear that there is a very intimate, intrinsic connection between your love from beginnings, for beginnings, and this kind of um, what resides in the act of translating, that is actually a new beginning because it's at the center of the creative act.
Mhm.
So what I want you to do is just to elaborate a little bit, because this is how we perceive your work and how I can connect your work, by the way, in a very interesting way, not with artists from the 20th century, but I have to go to the 18th century in order to really see this, right? So,
Can I say something?
yes.
Maybe she would
Yes.
react. Well, in my conversations with Carolina, I've realized that her perception is really tied to her entire body. It's a very vitalist kind of reaction to the world, and therefore, and we were talking about this, and therefore, it's not really related to modernism or to art history per se, because it's not, her sign making has nothing to do with signs that are already significant. She actually labors to make those signs almost erase any kind of associated meaning to them. And, if you look at the way she constructs the work, I mean, she will draw, but then she cuts the drawing in pieces and she reforms them by making these collages that are, again, more abstract than they began, if you know what I mean. And so, um, the idea of translation that I see in her work has a lot to do with this sort of synesthetic way in which she perceives the world, and that's why you can see, her photography related to drawing, uh, and then her,
It's a clear translation.
yeah,
Yes.
her description of the way she reacts to space is very body, informed. Um, and so she translates these primal, feelings that she has, instinctive feelings that she has, as she, witnesses the world, um, into signs. I mean, things that look like signs, but they're really, they really don't have any kind of signification that we can attach to them. Um, they're more feminine reactions that come from the gut, if you know what I mean. I mean, when we talk about, I mean, like if we had to relate her to another artist that works with, notation
Gestures,
and
yeah.
gestures, like Cy Twombly. Cy Twombly definitely has a relationship to history and to signification, even though he's making very abstract, gestures. There's still that reference to history. In Carolina's work, it's exactly the opposite. I mean, she's erasing, the trace of history to go back to the very essence of the first gesture, you know, of the gesture that characterizes, uh, something archaeological that we might find, in a 40,000 year, site. So I pass the word to you so you can
Well,
elaborate on that.
yeah, I think you have both articulated that idea very well. I can just say that yes, I identify what you're saying about my way of approaching the world being very kinesthetic, and indeed there is a very like organic, um, intuitive relation to my work, or a way of working. It's very much from the body.
Mhm.
Um,
And
I
and tell them the story about the emotion you had as a child when you learned how to write, uh,
Yes, yes,
translating
yes,
translating sound into cursive writing. I mean,
yes.
we had a conversation about that, and I was very touched by the fact that just the idea of translating sound into these forms was something that really marked it.
Yes, I recall clearly, and I'm obviously very interested in mark making, right? I remember clearly when I was learning how to write that it was like almost a magic act. The fact that I could write, I could make traces, make visual a sound. And my name is Carolina Otero Pardo. And in Spanish, it was so easy to translate those sounds into the writing. And I was simply fascinated. Once I learned to write my name, I would be writing it over and over and over, like if it was an art of magic. Yes, yes.
Well, and also your relationship to sound itself, to singing,
Yes,
which
yes.
which we wrote about, all the notation like uh, figures that you see in the other room. Her sister Mercedes, who's a wonderful electronic music composer, called them names, and names are the pre
Notation
notation
of
of
music.
music in the medieval times that used to be placed over, the Gregorian chants, in order to show what the inflection of the voice should be, how long, your singing, for instance, of a vowel, should be,
And
but
also where to breathe.
or where to breathe,
Yes.
exactly. And so when her sister saw the installation of her little uh, forms in plaster, she said, "Oh my gosh, they remind me of the gnomes."
Yes.
But tell them about your experience with music.
Well, music has always been present in my life. Not only it's my sister a musician, but I grew up in an environment where I was like very close to many types of artists, not only visual artists, there were musicians and actors and actors and poets and so on. So music has always been there. I have sang for many, many years in choirs. So I feel that the space of music is somehow very present in my work,
Mhm.
and the notions of rhythms and the notions of gestures even in space, and that might come from the music.
I would like you to come back to maybe to the methodology of doing your
Mhm.
work,
Yes.
right? And how there is this kind of uh, permanent connection to the beginnings, right?
Mhm.
Like how to transform a drawing that is at the beginning of everything, right, into a collage, and that collage into a different collage, and one work into another. Like if they, you know, like if that, I mean, your love for beginnings is also at the center of the methodology of your work, right? Like, can you just
Yeah, it is true. It
illustrate a
is
little bit
true.
more?
I've always worked with collage, and the way I've worked with collage is almost like chance. I would have this image and I would break it apart, not even looking at it,
Mhm.
and then from those pieces, those fragments, those
Mhm.
vestigios,
Mhm.
I would build something else from what those fragments would incite or tell me. In a way, it's like a bit like poetry. When you take a word out of context and put it in another context, you make it say something else.
Mhm.
In that very same way, I work with image, and more with than image is more with gestures, with mark, with traces, with memories, because it's abstract work, right? So it's more like energies that are taken from one reality into another, which is the reality I create.
And if we come, for instance, to this series of works that we have here, um, in that kind of reduction to the essence of, let's say,
Yes.
this one,
Yes.
there is sort of need of translating, right? It's not representation, it's translation,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Um, how you how
Well,
you reach that point?
yes, this series of two images, a photograph and a drawing, or a photograph and a collage, I call them dialogues, diálogos. And they are these pairing, these marriages of two ways of expressions. And I should say, we haven't said it here, that all of this work was produced during the pandemic. So these are the pictures I was taking with my phone on my daily walks. And I was at the same time working on my collages and my drawings. And I would take a walk and come back and start editing my pictures and have them there, sitting there, And then I was working on my collage, and all of a sudden I realized I'm saying the same thing. You know, this is happening in two languages. So that's how the dialogues came about. And it's a series that I'm still developing, but they have to do with this essence, maybe, this translation, maybe, because in a photograph, you're already creating something, with the cropping, with the way I mean, the angle you are looking at it, and even in the addition, you're making a creation of it, right?
Yeah, it's like in a way you are having an X-ray of the image that you took with your cell phone, your camera, or
If
whatever.
you may,
Right,
yeah.
and you go into the bones and the flesh, and like really the body itself, which is exactly what Logier is doing with the so-called primitive art,
Yes, yes,
which is a completely different way of dealing with modernism.
yes.
Which is what I found that Pablo. I guess that Pablo was my student, right? Like,
Yes.
but and maybe we love just to continue with that topic about modernism
Okay.
because it's so amazing how you can uh, stop yourself and recreate yourself in a position of not questioning, of not interrogating modernism, but being there at the distance, detached, right?
But what I think is, I mean, what your work really made so clear to me, this idea of translation, to me is really interesting because I always think uh, of our contemporary artists today, doing critiques of modernism. We all speak modernism. I mean, it's the lingua franca. We can't get away from it. That's our language, right? But being a contemporary artist today, you have to have a certain distance or position vis-a-vis, that language. And and what I think is really interesting about Carolina's work is that she gets away completely from the idea of representation, which is really one of the biggest, paradigms of Western thought or Western uh, uh, art history. The idea of representation has always been behind all of our Western art history. But when you change the idea of representation to translation, it's a completely different subject. Okay, and I think in itself that's kind of a critique of representation. It's skirting it, right? But it's also presenting this other much wider scope of creation, because translation can be a much wider form of expression, and it's not only about retinal representation. It's not only about seeing things, right? uh, and making mimetic image. So I think that when Carolina's addressing all these dialogues, what she's really capturing is an invisible kind of energy there. We're not, she's not representing any of these images. She's not drawing from reality or trying to, to have a relationship with it as form. It's really, like you said, like these typologies. I mean, they're archetypes in a way. They're essences that go to a much deeper, moment. So anyway,
Yeah,
that,
no, this
that's
is
my
great.
idea
Yes,
of translation.
yes.
Should I move to the second statement
Yes.
so that we move to another topic that is at the center of Carolina's work? Okay. So, so let's come back to the broken bits of Asian architecture that are piled up in the foreground of the frontispiece of Roget's book. In the same way, they also appear in the foreground of the frontispiece of Sebastiano Serliov's book on antiquities that was published 2 centuries before. In order to move from origins and translation to fragmentation in Carolina's work. I'm just passing the wrong computer, to the use of fragmentation to talk about complex narrative, about incompleteness, about fracturedness, about what was left behind, the remnants. I never know how to pronounce that word. But before we talk about Carolina's work, let me go back one more time to the 18th century, but this time to the work of one of his great artists, Giovanni Battista Piranesi. Here represented in this amazing engraving, fragments for the plan for the Temple of Romulus. So we are talking about an artist that, as Andreas Huisen argues, quote, point towards a critical and alternative understanding of modernity that always stood against the naive belief in progress and the moral improvement of mankind, end quote. In his colossal Campo di Marzio, Piranesi treated all forms of classical origin as mere fragments, as deformed symbols, as hallucinating organisms of an order in a state of decay, to challenge any ideal of totality and universality. In its horror vacuum, the struggle between the demand for order and the will for formlessness becomes a form of interrogation of the Enlightenment dialectic, is inability to separate the irrational from the rational, no reason from reason. So on the one hand, the historical precedents are visible and clear. On the other hand, all compositional elements are disarticulated. Piranesi's work attempted to establish a dialogue between the new epistemology of the Enlightenment and the classic past different from the one established during the Renaissance. So in Piranesi's fictional constructions, similar to your work, Carolina, there is this attempt to liberate themselves from form. In this attempt to liberate themselves from form, it emerged as an alternative understanding of modernity. In Carolina's work, design, order, and structure are bound to fragmentation, disorder, and dissolution. So to initiate and to incite instability in the image is to undermine coherence as such. And let me just stop here for a second in these two works. So we have these two sorts of palimpsestos. I'm sorry, this one and this one, in which we have some images that are encapsulated in these fragments that they could speak to one of the most extraordinary works of modernism that we have in Venezuela, the Aula Magna. But they can also be just fragments themselves there, disarticulated in a kind of series of layers of transparencies and opacities and lines, etc., right? So in your work, and I'm bringing very old work of you, There is no Gauguin. Gauguin is completely covered by these drawings or stains or fragments, right? There is no Picasso. In Carolina, collages, like in this one. There is no Palazzo Vecchio in Firenze or Notre Dame in Paris. There are only detritus of the past, even an immediate past, the past produced by yourself, by broken the molds and transforming forms into ruins, that seems to repeat the archaeological imaginary of Piranesi's etching in a comfortable state of dwelling with fragments, of inhabiting the fragments. So let me just bring other two very old works of you, your self-portrait from the early 1980s, right? 82. And this very first nude that you did out of fragments. Um, I would love to hear from you where your fragments come from.
I wouldn't really know how to answer that. Well, let me think.
You can use your own word.
Um, well, I might speculate, right? I don't know, that being born and immersed in modernity, right? I am in a way um, putting that aside and beginning again, you know, by working out of vestiges and pieces. I don't know if that tells you something or.
I'm sure there is a lot more than that.
Yes, well, help me out, please.
Well, let me just come here to the very beginning, right? I know that the one to the right of all of you is a very early exercise, right?
Yes.
Where you have to draw a nude, a
Yes.
naked woman, right?
Yes.
And then destroy it
Yeah.
and transform it into this nude made out of little pieces.
Yes.
And then we have this beautiful self-portrait in which I think there is also a kind of very clear differentiation, right, in your face. You know, one is darker, the other one is lighter.
Yes.
Um, and there is something really comfortable, for the lack of a better word, of you dealing with fragments and transforming a fragment, like fragments are in your work always at that state of being at the border of collapsing again and again and again, right? um, and I wonder if, you know, and also if I go behind, you know, it doesn't matter what is represented in those images. Doesn't matter if I can identify Palazzo Vecchio and Notre Dame or anything else, or if you use Picasso or Gauguin or at the borders, right? Like
Yes.
when Surpik was saying before that you are erasing history, it's not, you're not erasing history as a modernist, you know, like you are not making a tabula rasa.
No.
You actually need that kind of series
Yes.
of layers that is there. It's like noise. You need the noise.
Yes. Yes.
You know.
Well,
So
yeah.
exactly. What is there? And I think that, you know, I think that has to do with something very profound. Uh,
Yes, you're talking about the noise, okay? So I do want to think about this lifetime exposure to the history of civilization and this parallel life that we're having now as a 20th century citizens of the world, where we are exposed and bombarded with everything that is happening at the same time. Isn't that a fragmentation, right? Isn't that um, noise, right? So, in a way, I am immersed in all of that and trying to make sense of my life and of my language, right? As an artist, building from fragments.
Mhm. And noise is also similar to, modernity is so ocular centric. And it
Yes.
seems that in your case, there is something that has to do with vision right there that um, it's like no need, right? Like there is no need. You can actually see in the way that you can identify things in the noise.
Yes.
Are you following me?
Yes.
Okay, so I wonder, I mean, how we can explain that, for instance, in your earlier collages that has not to do with the life that we're living today, but a completely different life that you were living in San Antonio de los Altos, in Caracas, Venezuela, in an almost bucolic situation, right? Surrounded by loving parents, by a very creative environment, by nature, etc.
So I guess we want to talk about my physical way of looking at things a
Yeah,
little.
I think that that will be
Yes.
if you want,
So
I think that will be
yes,
great.
we have been talking about is the three of us. Previous to this conversation, I was born with this syndrome in my left eye, and it's in my family, and it comes every three generations. And what happens is that my left eye does not move; it's malformed. So, as a child in this ideal bucolic, loving environment, I was subjected to these. I had my left eye, my lazy eye, was almost closed. So the ophthalmologist, the eye doctor, prescribed that I put a patch on my good eye for the bad eye to work. And one thing is that I have always to look frontally because if I don't, I see double image or I just cannot see. So the experience of growing up with this right eye closed was something. It was not nice. And the thing is that not only I mean, I do not move the eye, but I have less vision. So with my right eye covered, I would just stumble, right? I would bump into things because the stereoscopic vision wasn't there. And but that's not the most important thing of that experience, which happened days and months at a time that I had to use my patch. The thing is that when that was taken off my eye, or when I took that off my eye, it was like life came back. I mean, literally, I'm saying it, and I have this feeling in my whole body of God, I'm seeing, and I'm seeing clearly, and the light is coming in because I was, in a way, in darkness with my good eye covered. So, Serpik and Fabiola have been relating this experience, this very bodily and experiential way of perceiving the world to my work. Yes?
It's such an amazing, it was such a revelatory thing. I mean, it explains so many things to us, to Surpik and myself,
Mhm.
that it is really I think that is so important, right? When we, I mean, the work that we do as architecture, art or architectural historians or curators is really, it's like a detective work, right? Like you are trying to see how an artist work in the way that it work, that he or that they work, and also what kind of languages, why the language is what it is, right? And the topics are the topics that you are coming back over and over
Yes.
again. And then when I saw yesterday, only yesterday, your self-portrait from 1982, I thought that was really, and that is also from 1982.
Yes.
The that
Yes, about yes. Yes.
uh, they were very, very
Revealing.
revealing, yeah, and very powerful, and yeah, very telling of of your full trajectory as an artist. You wanted to say something?
I think we could open the
Yeah. I'm sorry, we can't be
Yes.
here talking forever. And I think
everybody's
that
been
yeah,
very
let's
silent,
open
and
to discussion.
if you have any comments and questions, it would be wonderful to hear you now.
So I have a question. So how many, did you have to do this for several years
Yeah.
on your eyes?
Yeah.
Did they claim that they were independent eyes?
They were independent?
Did the doctor call them independent eyes?
No, no, no,
No.
no.
So it was like 4 years, 3 years?
It was from 4 to 6, 7, 8. They would do it like I would had to do it like for long periods of time. And then when I became an adolescent, because they were taped to my face and my glasses were taped to my face. So when I was an adolescent, I said, the hell with this. And I didn't even wear glasses. But I was already an adult when I did that, when I took my glasses off and all of that. And the thing is that the work the ophthalmologist had done on myself and my work was very important to make my weak eye stronger. So it was what had to be done. I mean, if there are any medical doctors in here, you know, yes, it was.
You had to have a sense of humor.
Oh,
Other children
oh, they were.
themselves.
Yeah, I had people calling me, kids calling me the pirate and so on. But at the same time, the environment, I went to this very special school that my parents were part of. They were teachers there. And it was a very, indeed, special place. She calls them bucolic. We had, we had like children with, like difficulties like blind children, deaf children, ¿cómo se llama? Síndrome de Down, Down syndrome. We had all these kinds of people there, and I was one of those in a way. I was a very otherwise normal student, very good, very happy kid, very good student. I was on the top of my class the whole time. So it, at times it was heavy. It was heavy when I could not catch a ball because I didn't have the stereoscopic vision. It was tough if I fell down some stairs because I didn't, see something. And it was tough in school too, because I had to work with the other eye. And I would get headaches and all of that. But my parents took it, and that's the way I lived it. I don't feel a victim. I don't feel a handicapped person. I think that's like having long legs or having straight hair. I have an eye that doesn't move. That's it. And I'm living with it. And I chose to do a visual work. So isn't that something? It's not a handicap. It's just a trait of me, a characteristic of who I am.
But I still think, I don't know what you think, but I think it is a trail into uh, her work, and I clearly saw it when she revealed that. It seemed to me like the whole idea of fragmentation, the whole idea of of starting always all over. It's like I can relate it to her emotion every time she could see. Um, so I do see a relationship with the work. I don't know how you feel.
Is that self-portrait? You said it was the B or something.
Yeah.
Is that because of the condition?
I didn't do it consciously,
It was
not at all. I just drew myself. It's a very dramatic self
Well, it's
portrait.
what you saw.
Well, thing is that I was 20, I was in New York going to Cooper Union. There were like 600 students applying, 30 got in. I was like the artist. I was like paint all over and very dramatic and intense. And I remember my father seeing that and telling me, Carolina, that's not you. You come from the tropics, you come from the Caribbean. What is that? And I was like, I don't know, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm feeling. And we were like New York, I mean, at 20, it was like God, so intense and so rich and so wonderful. We had teachers like one of my teachers was contemporary with all the New York expressionists, and he was my teacher, my preferred teacher. So all those gods were there, alive almost. One of my classmates who was crazy about de Kooning as I was, he even went to visit him in his workshop. Like he knocked on his door, hey, I'm here. He was a very, outspoken guy, and just went there. And so that's the time when I drew that self-portrait. A passionate young artist.
So I mean, we were doing, so I haven't seen the whole thing, but now watching this, no, I don't know that one, but Builders is like the left side of the image is the one that is super abstract, and the other one is like where you can see something that actually
That's interesting.
represents something that we can identify.
very
So,
interesting.
so it's kind of like how you, I mean, I don't know, maybe you didn't think of it, or did you?
I didn't think about that. No, that's a realization. It's a realization, and maybe that has to do with the left and right hemisphere of the brain too. The very analytic and the more associative, and more like freer, more intuitive. I don't know.
No, I'm just saying that because you said and you that
Yeah.
comes like from a body experience.
Yes.
Like there's something
Yes.
there. So I'm like, okay.
Yes.
that-
Yes.
Yeah.
The brains
I think
are.
that's very perceptive.
Yes. The brains are part of the body. Yes. The brain is part of the body. So you wanted to ask something, Pablo? Pablo, no?
No, I
No.
was saying
Ah,
that
okay.
the same thing. Maybe she doesn't do it on purpose. It's like the self-portrait. She just that's what she sees.
Yeah, it's
That's
not
what she
conscious.
represents.
It's not conscious. Yeah.
Well,
Huh?
well,
There's
we
another
were,
question.
Troy, I mean,
I
sorry.
really appreciate Fabiola and Circuit Swing and the work. I mean, there's a lot, I think, to unpack in the kind of way in which it takes like kind of oscillate between something that's maybe more of a like picturesque image of the landscape that we're all immersed in here in Houston, and this kind of more abstract um, coding that like Fabiola, I think, do a lot of great work in like describing like translation and circuits as well. And I guess what I was curious about, and the kind of, and maybe this is maybe more a question for Fabiola, but the kind of position of the work as a like after modernism, or some kind of like alternative to like modernism. It seems like there's I keep thinking as everyone is like why we have the decoding of the work and or the code of the work is the drawing, and the decoding of it is always next to it, so we always know like what it's referring to. And I was wondering if it has anything to do with like all the photographs really kind of create a certain kind of like representational depth, like we're like outside of nature. Like that's like something that I think Leger is like very like conscious of too. Like the primitive hut is like a break between when we're like immersed in nature and we all of a sudden like know, that was like our savage days and this is like our modern days.
Civilized.
And it seems like there's like a collapse maybe. It's in the drawings and in the work we see in the other room, where it's like very hard to like make that kind of separation, right? Where there's like a kind of othering, and there's like the natural, and there's us, or there's like the world, and there's us. We're like somehow more embedded in it. And I don't know if that's like kind of like in the stage of the Anthropocene and how we understand our relationship to the natural as not like other. That's like something that's like coming up in the work.
Yeah. Do you want to?
No, just go ahead. What do you want to say? I want to hear what you want to say.
No, I found your question very interesting because I was actually thinking about the Anthropocene in relation to her work. I think that nature is not nature either. When she talks about nature, I mean, I was asked.
It's translation of nature.
Well, actually, it's really the Anthropocene. It's a
Mhm.
nature that has been touched. There is no nature anymore. There is
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
what
yeah,
we
yes,
call
yes,
nature doesn't
yes.
exist
But we are
anymore.
nature.
But we are all touched.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
We are
Yeah, yeah,
not,
yeah. Yes.
So I think that there is really something still to think about it. I mean, I just started thinking about Carolina's work really recently, but I do believe that there is an interest in the bones and the flesh, and it's not really what artists and architects were interested during modern times, right? That was how we can separate ourselves from nature. I think that what Carolina is interested is in the structure itself, in the bonds of it, in what I can just extract from that into a mark, a hint, a gesture, a trace, a threshold, something that allows me, Carolina, transform that into something else, right? Like a new beginning, a new threshold. So I don't think there is a coincidence that trees are transforming through thresholds in like there or in that one. It's not a bridge, it's not infrastructure that she's interested on. She's interested in something different that has to do with the structure itself of the bridge, but not as an infrastructure. I don't know. I can go with every one of those and try to really see that in her work. But you just,
No, I
this
think
is
it's
me
fine. No, no,
talking
no,
about your
but it's
work.
fine. I mean, you were here. A path, you said? Yes, path, yes.
Your path marking through the mark. I mean, it's something that brings you on beyond representation or
Mhm.
illustration. And it's so difficult to do, but you do it so well. That's why you're so successful. Even putting two things together that may not have any relationship, automatically, you have your brain, it's like the left eye and the right eye compensating for one another. You immediately want to have that kind of stereoscopic vision, both conceptually but also literally within the images that you're creating. And you find a really beautiful, delicate balance where there's a suspension of that, but they're always in dialogue. So it's
Yeah.
and just one question I have about the process that you're doing is that you have the photo in mind, but then you were making notes.
As I said before, I was drawing and collaging and I was taking pictures. And all of a sudden I realized this is the same.
But then you're pairing them.
Yes, I'm pairing this two manifestations of two essences. Maybe I'm precisely translating, something. And you said the other day that the work was about the energy. And yes, maybe, it is like it's the essence of things in a way, that synthesis, that reduction in these cases might be just relating to the essence. Yes. Yes.
I don't think I would put the artwork necessarily in the same context as I would view what we see and experience in this room. That there is there is something that strikes me, and I'm sure I did not share the same emotions, but I shared the walks, the reflection, and trying to make sense in the reduction task, and the dialogue which really took most of my place within ours.
Yes.
Because there was so little of it.
Yes.
So I think the portion of the work in this room to me strikes me as very, it's probably at the very, very core of where the work is. And the other work transcends it on other level, but this is at its most reduced, I would say. And actually, in a way, probably maybe speaks the most to us because it is so, it's so pure in what it is. Yes, the all way to it.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I identify myself with what you're saying. If I may say something, as you know, for every one of us, I was well aware of the magnitude of what was going on. And in a way, I said, well, as a human being, I'm here, I'm alive, thank God, I have a roof, my family's okay. This is just a space to look inside and just work. And I was so grateful, so thankful for the silence too. It was like, for me, perfect. I almost feel guilty about saying this, but yes, it was a very precious moment, I think, for humanity to look inside and think about what we are and what we're doing too, right? As a humankind.
Also, you're looking at this work from my perspective. You become aware of the beauty of the pandemic. You become aware of the beauty of the virus. The importance of those extremes that we have to experience for us to become aware of where we are. How long can I run? 3 years, 4 years? Who knows? It seems like an eternity now. But the complexity of these works, it's incredible because the reduction that you have done through these 3 years, and I remember how you moved something an eighth of an inch or a 16th of an inch to make it say what it's supposed to say. It also, your detachment of isms, and being the daughter of two art monsters, you have done completely the opposite. It's this esoteric world where you want us to experience something, but at the same time you want it to disappear. And especially with the
plasters, yes.
But we need to have light to experience it, but the light that disappears, and what we experience is the shadow.
Yeah.
And so it's that dichotomy of your work that I've always enjoyed and experienced. And it's very, very difficult to communicate that to people. And but yeah, we're going to a primal emotion, a primal feeling that culturally we avoid. Thanks to the pandemic, thanks to the microscopic virus, we're able to stop for a moment and realize that we have to question what is important.
Yeah.
translate that
Mhm.
into these images.
Mhm.
What a pleasure it is for us to walk and to experience life.
Yeah. Yes. 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 I think that was, yeah.
Because, the world reveals itself to the person who walks.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And we have forgotten to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say that one of the most moving things for me is the modesty, the subtlety, the, I mean, coming from where she's coming, that, incredible, humble attitude and subtlety about the work really moved me to tears. Because not only it's difficult to, as an artist to entail that search for your own language, which is really, humongous experience. But to come from where she's coming from and to express herself in such subtle, you know, sensitive ways, as you said, so beautifully. Um, it really moved me to tears. And coming out of this pandemic right now, it's all more significant. I mean, I always wanted to do a show about subtlety. And and when I saw her work, and I was reading Marcel Duchamp's idea about the inframans, which I think you have definitions of, but it's so beautiful. Marcel Duchamp was obsessed with the idea of inframans, the subtle, the imperceptible, from day one, from 1914 or 1912 throughout his life. Um, which I think is probably what made his work so magical, you know. And I think it's one of those values that we've forgotten. I mean, we're so used to screaming art and art that's saying, look at me," but we seldom stop and look and with our own eyes and feel with our own hearts. And I'm so grateful to him.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Okay, thank you all for coming. Gracias.